the Propain Tyee Trail. This bike is super sick. I have two rides on it prior to launch for about 40 to 100 feet of climbing and descending, and it kind of reshaped my whole prioritization of what I want in a bike. What is this bike? It's 145 millimeters of rear travel, 160 millimeters of travel up front. You can run it in a full 29, a mullet, or a full 27.5 in the extra small and small sizing. As far as the build options go, Propain continues with the bread and butter customization. You can choose kind of whatever components you want, all the way from suspension, wheels, drivetrain, brakes, dropper posts, things like that. So it gives the customer, us, the ability to say, hey, I want to put my money upgrades into X category. So for the aluminum custom build, that starts at 3,299. For the carbon, the custom build starts at 3,899, and then obviously those go up, and you can build a pretty baller build even with like some trick stuff brakes on there. And then if that's kind of daunting and scary and you just want to click buy on something that works, we have Signature Spec 1, which for aluminum starts at 3,449. Great entry level starting bike, solid components. For the carbon, that's 4,049. And then Signature Spec 2, you get upgraded suspension, upgraded brakes, things like that. For the aluminum, starts at 5,399. And then for the carbon option, that's 5,999. Okay, so this bike takes a lot of the bread and butter from the Tyee Enduro and it changes it slightly. So the frame is actually the same. However, the upper link in the Pro 10 suspension, that is different. So we have a new link and then we also have a new stroke shock. So instead of the Tyee Enduro comes with a 210 by 55, the Tyee Trail is 210 by 50, right? So the three kind of big changes in this is the upper link, the different stroke shock, and then the reduced fork makes this 145, 160 package from the Enduro version, which is 160, 170. So I got some geometry numbers up on the screen so we can kind of look at the main differences. Honestly, there's not too much here. The biggest thing, in my opinion, to note is the head angle. So in that trail all mountain category, you typically want a steeper head tube angle than the Enduro world. A steeper head tube angle just makes it easier to turn the bike in kind of slower speed sections, whereas a slacker head tube angle that a lot of Enduro bikes have make it more comfortable in steeper sections, more stable at speeds, but you can sometimes sacrifice the real ease of maneuverability in maybe slower, tighter sections. So the steeper head tube angle is a welcome change in this all mountain category. Yo, I actually noticed something else while editing this video that I wanted to talk about and that I thought was pretty interesting between the Tyee Trail and the Tyee Enduro. So the best way I'm going to do this is through paint. And we are going to be looking at the BB or bottom bracket offset. So the Trail has a 30 millimeter bottom bracket offset, and then the Enduro has 22. So a bottom bracket offset basically, um, I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. So the bottom bracket offset, pretend this is the rear axle all the way to the front axle. Okay, there's a perpendicular line, and then you have the bottom bracket somewhere here. Okay, this BB offset, like these millimeters, is this measurement. Okay, so in theory, a larger bottom bracket offset means you should, in theory, feel like you are riding inside the bike more because your feet and where your center of gravity is lower in the bike than if you have a shorter bottom bracket offset. What's interesting is that typically more stability comes with a higher number bottom bracket offset and potentially more pedal strikes, things like this. So a lot of times enduro riding, downhill riding, you kind of want something like that for the stability where you're riding in the bike and your center of gravity is lower. My experience on the Tyee Trail was not what this geometry really suggested. I definitely got the sense that I was riding on top of the bike. It was easy to maneuver. It still felt stable, but there were definitely times that it got squirrely on, again, some unsanctioned stuff that I'm not going to show. But bottom bracket offset, that there is a pretty substantial difference, right? Like 8 millimeters is quite a bit. You would think should be flip-flopped, but anyway, bottom bracket offset, that is interesting to note. Back to the main video. So then it begs the question of like, why would you get Tyee Trail over Tyee Enduro? My experience on the Tyee Trail was sick. Like I said before, my 2 rides kind of changed my whole philosophy on like how I'm thinking about my next bike. In that the Tyee Trail with modern suspension, like suspension is so good these days. I found this bike was extremely capable for everyday use. I don't think I would want to take it to the bike park. There was some unsanctioned stuff that I did that I obviously can't show on camera. That it got a little dicey with the 145, 160. But for the majority of everything else that I would generally ride, this bike was just more fun. And what I mean by that is this bike really wanted me to ride on top of it and be active and be manipulative of the bike. Like, to get down the trail, instead of just rolling over things or charging through rocks, it was so easy to be able to maybe add a little extra hop to jump onto the rocks to catch a transition to go down, or put the back wheel a little bit to the side of the trail to miss a certain section to then carry more speed. It prioritized fun in that it was a very active bike. And how it changed my philosophy is like having a lyric on there instead of a Zeb, and having, you know, shorter travel in the rear makes it easier to maneuver and less plow focused. But that also means that when I do want to maneuver it, I'm spending less energy doing that, so I can do it just more. Like, I can be an active rider for longer periods of the trail. And in the PNW, we have some pretty lengthy descents. And this bike was just, it was just super fun to be able to get down, you know, those descents in a very creative, poppy, playful, whatever. All of those buzzwords that people say about how fun a bike is, I seriously experienced that on the Tyee Trail. The other thing about this bike that kind of changed my philosophy is air shocks versus coil. I've always been in the camp that coil is supreme because I love that small bump sensitivity. However, again, with current generation shocks, air shocks, everyone that I've ridden, I've felt like I've gotten plenty of small bump sensitivity. I felt like I've gotten plenty of bottom out support. It may not be as top of the line as a coil shock in those regards, but again, just the weight savings for the climb and the weight savings to continuously be an active rider on the descent, as opposed to reverting to a passenger I'm just going to smash through because I have really big suspension to get me through it. I'm prioritizing the active riding. That's what's been most enjoyable for me in the past, you know, several months. So I'm going to continue with that. My next bike will have an air shock as opposed to a coil.
Another thing that I was thinking about as I was editing the video that I wanted to talk about for a philosophy change is I am pretty sold on full 29er. I think mullet is still better if you're like bike park riding or doing some like shuttle, unsanctioned, steep kind of stuff. But for the overall riding on the trail, I've really enjoyed the full 29er. It rolls over things really good. It keeps speed really good, so I don't feel like I'm losing as much speed. And again, with the reduced shock, air shock, lighter weight, I don't find I'm sacrificing a ton of maneuverability with the larger wheel in the back. So
I have ridden the Spindrift, and I thought I was going to build a Spindrift this year to race, but I'm not. I'm going to build a Tyee Enduro for the racing to have a little bit more stability, more travel to get me out of some hairy situations. However, when I'm not racing, I'm going to convert it to a Tyee Trail. How do you convert the current Tyee Enduro to a Tyee Trail? At the time of making this video, Propain does not offer the conversion kit, but it's definitely something that I know for a fact is being worked on. So the conversion is you need the trail upper length, you need a 210 by 50 shock, and then you also need a 164. So if you get, I assume Propain will eventually in the near future offer the upper length and the shock, because I think it's important to match the tune of the shock to the bike that you get. But you get those, and then you have a new fork, and then you're able to change, you know, your current Tyee Enduro to a Tyee Trail. I think this bike fits very nicely in Propain's lineup. You know, it's more traveled than the Eugene, but it's less traveled than the Tyee Enduro, and I think it fits kind of the majority of what everyday riding actually looks like. Anyway, I loved this bike. I loved riding it for the 2 days. I can't wait to build mine up. But anyway, yeah, thanks for tuning into this one. Don't forget the most important trail of the day's next one, and I'll see everybody in the next video. Bye.